how do you deal with the racist, the sexist, the homophobe next door or at work or around the corner? And one of the things that informed this was this remarkable survey that's out that shows that pro-lifers, people who are opposed to abortion, are principally motivated by a desire to keep women in their place, in quotes, and which is pretty remarkable. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. But Professor Richard Wolff is on the line with us. He is the economist and co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author most recently of Understanding Marxism. rdwolf with 2fs.com is the website, and Prof. Wolf with 2fs is his Twitter handle. Before I brought you on, what we had been talking about in the previous hour, I'm curious how capitalism has been used, and whether or not it's even intrinsic to capitalism, or it's simply just another tool that could be used by racists to perpetuate racial hierarchy, by misogynists to perpetuate the domination of women, by homophobes to perpetuate the oppression of people who are, not straight or gender conforming, or whatever however you describe that. To what role does capitalism play in all this?
Well, I think it's a very, very important role. I think these things are intimately connected, and let me explain how that works. Given that capitalism is so unstable, that it has a major downturn every 4 to 7 years, during which typically millions of people are thrown out of work, huge numbers of small and medium-sized businesses, and even a few big ones go out of business. They flare out and explode or disintegrate. Given that, you would have a very hard time holding on to capitalism if it really affected everyone. In other words, if we were all, like random numbers, worried every 4 to 7 years, any plans we'd made, any home we had made a down payment on, any education plans for our children could be blown away because we would be caught up, each of us randomly, in whenever the downturn was. If you live a normal life to 70 or 80 years, you're going to go through lots of those, and it would be extraordinarily disruptive. What has happened in most capitalist societies who have understood this is that the capitalist system, even without anyone planning it, it's not a conspiracy, assign the uncertainty, the instability to particular subgroups. Here in the United States, it is African Americans, it is non-whites, it is women. Why? Because every time there's a downturn, those people are the ones first fired. Every time there's an upswing, they're the ones last hired. They're the ones who absorb disproportionately the instability, the ups and downs. Then, in a peculiar twist, the rest of the society is encouraged, here comes the white supremacy, to believe that the African American or the woman who goes in and out of the labor force, that this is somehow a peculiarity of them, that it is something intrinsic to an African American or a female, etc., that he, she is in and out of the labor force, not understanding that somebody in capitalism has to be kicked out of the labor force every 4 to 7 years. And if you did it to everybody, then everybody would have a shared interest in changing the system so we don't have this kind of absurd instability. Instead, we give the permanent job, the job least likely to be bounced out when we have these downturns, to the white men. And they get that kind of privilege. They've always had that. And you focus the instability, the uncertainty, the up and down of the labor market onto the secondary people, the repressed people, the discriminated against people. And then you make the whole system work by blaming the instability not on the system that's causing it, but on the individuals. It's a wonderful example of blaming the victim.
So this is why when President Obama became president, inheriting, a downturn, this Bush crash, that Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and all these guys over on Fox News were constantly ranting about, look at how many people are on food stamps now. Oh my God! And I'm guessing probably more often than not they'd show pictures of black people.
Absolutely, and you can get, the full horror of all of this is that the white supremacy we see now was stoked I mean, it's always been here, as you pointed out earlier, but it was really stoked because the white people in America, having been given this peculiar privilege, had, of course, in the back of their mind, a guilt. You don't have to be a psychologist to see it. They kind of know, even without admitting it, that they're in this privileged position. And so they have the behavior that's typical of guilty people. They imagine that if ever those African Americans or those women who have been bounced in and out of the labor force with all the disruption and uncertainty that that means in your personal life, your career, and everything else, they have the fear that if a black man were to become president, and I think the same applies if it were a woman, white or black, that they will be the victims of the people they have been victimizing. In other words, that it will be role reversal. They're terrified of that. They know very well, in some sense, what they've been getting all along. And since there's no one to help them understand that this is a systemic problem and not a problem about this or that group in the population, they can't think about a system that wouldn't require this kind of suffering of anybody, white or black, male or female. They can only think of who's in the better position, and I'd rather be on top than on the bottom because of how this society works. So the worst thing I can imagine is a black person as president or a female as president. We're going to see all that played out in the months ahead in a very ugly way.
Yeah, especially if a woman gets the Democratic nomination,
Right.
which I think is very likely.
Right.
It's, wow, amazing stuff.
It's a very scary, but this coincidence or coming together, this convergence of an unstable economic system that has kept itself going by setting people against each other, this is coming to a head in our society, and we're in for quite a stormy time.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.